Welcome to the Dad 77 podcast. I am Kerry Briggs. We are continuing a study in Revelations. We are in Revelations 10, and we'll probably get through some of 11. So we have completed the fifth and the sixth trumpet. We have an expectation of the seventh trumpet. However, we have an interlude here before the seventh trumpet. We're in chapter 10. It's a short chapter, 11 verses, and the seventh trumpet doesn't sound until Revelation 11:15. So, and this is just like the seals. We got to the sixth seal, and then there was an interlude before we had the seventh seal. So it's a kind of a consistency of the way Revelation and the apocalyptic language is keeping in a sequence. So if you grew up very conservative, if you grew up with a dispensational point of view, you are going to hear something that's totally different than what you were taught. It's totally different than what I was taught, but doing some more study, and that I always had a lot of questions. How could this be? This doesn't make sense. That, if you put it into the future, not in something that's already happened or something that's going on now, it just didn't make sense. And so doing some more studying, I found an individual who has studied it in huge details, read over 50 different commentators on Revelation, and a lot of information. And as I listened to him and researched, there was a lot of stuff that went, oh, that makes sense. Oh, now I get that. Oh, I see how that plays in here and stuff. So if you grew up with pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, all those tribs, and that this is going to be totally different for you. So we are in chapter 10. I'm going to read the whole thing, and then we will go back. So chapter 10, verse 1, I saw another strong angel come down from heaven, clothed in a cloud, and rainbow on his head, and his face was like the sun, and his feet were like pillars of fire. Many people believe that this is Jesus. It doesn't really matter. It's an angel. Jesus in the Old Testament was considered many times angel of the Lord. It doesn't really matter. What is important is his message, what he does. And in his hand, he held a little scroll which was opened. He placed one foot on the sea, and placed his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And he cried with a loud voice as when a lion roars. And when he had cried out, the seven pearls of thunder uttered their voices. When the seven pearls of thunder had spoken, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up the things which the seven pearls of thunder have spoken, and do not write them. Then the angel whom I saw standing in the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heaven and the things in it, the earth and the things in it, the sea and the things in it, that there will no longer be a delay. A delay in what? Remember back in earlier chapters, the martyrs at the foot of the altar cried out, Lord, when are you going to avenge us? Well, here we are. There should be a delay no longer. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound his trumpet, is about to sound, then the mystery of God is finished, and he announced to his servants, the prophets. I got my bad teeth in today. I'm not talking very well or reading very well. So let me read that verse 7 again. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, then the mystery of God is finished, as he announced to his servants, the prophets. Much better. Then the voice which I heard from heaven, I heard again speak to me, saying, Go take the scroll which is open in his hand of the angel who stands on the sea and the land. And I went to the angel and told him, Hey, give me the scroll. And he said to me, Take it and eat it. It will be bitter in your stomach, but it'll be sweet in your mouth. And I took the scroll from the angel and ate it, and in my mouth it was sweet as honey. And when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. And he said to me, You must prophesy again concerning many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. So here we have this interlude of a vision, possibly in heaven. It says he came down in a cloud, so it's not really relevant where it actually took place, but a strong angel. And as I said earlier and alluded, that many people believe that that's Jesus. Maybe, could be, but it's more important what he did. So he had a little scroll in his hand, and it's interesting that the little scroll, it's mentioned here as little. We had a scroll earlier that there was no mention of its size or anything. And as you take all this in, that you must prophesy again, and it's a little scroll, it is a second prophecy that is smaller in nature compared to everything that's happening in the rest of Revelation. So it's a smaller prophecy, but not any less important. So the angel has a little scroll. It was open, and he places his right foot on the sea. Sea is an indication of Gentiles, and his left foot on the land. And it's interesting here because we've talked about this, where land can be translated earth or land. It's the same word, Greek word for both of those. And it's up to the person who's doing the translation, whether they translate it the land or the earth. Neither is wrong. Both of them are right. However, as discussed earlier, I believe that the land is more appropriate. And when you talk about the land, you talk about Israel and what's happening in Israel. The earth is more global in that. So he has one foot. So this is a prophecy that includes both the Gentile and the Jews. So then an interesting thing, that when the angel cries out, there's 7 pearls of thunder, and they utter their voice. And John is told to seal that up and don't release that information. You go to Revelations 22:10, I believe, and John is told not to seal this up because these things are shortly going to happen. Here, he's told to seal it up because we're taking a step in the middle of what is being talked about, the fall of Jerusalem, and there's this interlude in between it, and and this little book and this little prophecy, and but he's told to seal this up. Much like Daniel in Daniel 12, he was told to seal up this this vision, this dream that he had. And he even said, well, what does it mean? And he was basically told, don't worry about it. It's not for you. It's not for your time. It's for way down the road in the future. The same kind of thing here. When you seal up a prophecy, it's because it's for later in the future. But most of the rest of Revelation, outside of 10, 11, 12, 13, is about AD 70 in the fall of Jerusalem, where he is told at the end that he is to prophesy again. And some commentators believe that the little book and the seven peals of thunder that were spoken has to do with chapters 11, 12, and 13. That it is the small prophecy, that it is a second prophecy that John has been given. So let's see. Then in verse 5 it says that he's standing on the sea and the land, and he raised his right hand toward heaven. And then in verse 6, he swore by him who lives forever, who created all things, that there would no longer be a delay, but that when the seventh angel, who is about to sound, when he sounds his trumpet, then the mystery of God is complete. It's the mystery of God that he, God, announced to his servants, the prophets. So what message did God give to the prophets? Well, that message had to do with God's redemptive work. After the fall of man, he continually worked to redeem man, and how eventually he was going to redeem man with his Messiah, his Christ, his anointed one, who was Jesus. And the prophecy about Jesus is there's lots and lots and lots of verses and prophecies about Jesus coming, the Messiah coming. Where would he be? Who would he be? What would he do? That he would bear our sorrows, that he was the man of sorrow, that he would be crucified and die for the sins of the world, to make that payment. So that was what was prophesied to it. But what is the mystery of God? What is the mystery of God? Let's go to Ephesians 3 through 6. And this is Paul talking about mystery of God. And Paul uses the term mystery of God about three-ish times. And he always, when he's talking about the mystery of God, is always meaning and talking about the same thing. There's no, well, it could be this or it could be that. He's talking about the mystery of God. So let's go to Ephesians 3:3. That by revelation there was made known to me the mystery, as I wrote before briefly. By referring to this, when you read, you can understand my insight into the mystery of Christ, which in other generations was not made known to mankind, as it had been revealed to his holy apostles and prophets in the Spirit. To be specific, this is verse 6, that the Gentiles are fellow heirs and members of the body and fellow partakers in the promise of Jesus Christ through the gospel. So the mystery of God is that Jews and Gentiles would merge into the church, who is headed by Jesus after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. Then the church was born, and continued to grow, and has continued to grow the whole rest of time. So Paul here is telling us what the mystery of God is. So you go back to the mystery of God is finished. So if the mystery of God is the church, the Jews and the Christians, Gentiles, becoming one body, one entity after Christ, that is the mystery of God. That from that point on of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, the church then began to grow, and it began to grow as one body. And that is the mystery of God, which is kind of cool. And there's a lot of things, side roads you could go down, in 80, 70, before Rome circled the town. The Christian Jews got out, and went, and we'll talk about this later, but they got out of Jerusalem, and that remnant was saved. But I get ahead of myself. I can't help it. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 50. Now I say this, brothers and sisters, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I am telling you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead in Christ will raise, imperishable, and will be changed. So, Paul also talks about the return of Christ and at the last trump. Well, we're getting to that point here pretty quickly in the last trump. And a lot of people hem-haw and try to say, well, the last trump is in the future. It's not here. It's, and that. But the writers knew what that meant. The readers knew what that meant, the last trump. And we are about to move into that whole thing. So then in verse 8, John, is told to take the scroll from the angel, eat it. It will be sweet in his mouth. It will be bitter in your stomach. And this is a echo or a reference to Ezekiel. Had a same prophecy in Ezekiel 3 where he ate a book and it was sweet in his mouth and bitter in his stomach. And then after John does this, then, and they said to me, you must prophesy again concerning many peoples, languages, nations, and kings. So all this up to this point has been about the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. This here then, and it's about the Jews. the Jews rejecting Christ, the Jews, the 144,000, which will be explained even more, has already been mentioned that they were sealed by God. And that remnant got out of Jerusalem before the Roman armies surrounded them. And then eventually the destruction of Jerusalem happened. And so obviously it's the letters to the churches in the first couple chapters, but then it's about 80, 70. We have chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, and then after that we go back to more events regarding the fall of Jerusalem. But here in the middle, it's talking about something else. It's talking about another prophecy. It's talking about the church of both Jew and Gentile becoming one body, and that for the rest of time. And we'll see as we head into chapter 11, that will be explained even more. But there are writers, theologians, I guess we'll say, who believe that this small book is chapters 11, 12, and 13. And we're going to go to chapter 11. Somehow it wasn't up. There we go. So there's a lot of information in here. I've got like around 9 minutes to get through some of this. So some of this is going to be in here, and then we're going to go to something else. But so there's something that happens in 11 and 12 that I want to kind of explain before we get into 11 and that. There is a measure of time given, and it is given in apocalyptic language of 3 different ways, but the same amount of time. For example, 42 months. That the holy city will be trampled for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. That the 2 witnesses would prophesy for 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. That the beast, it talks about the beast being for 42 months, and there's a reference to the woman that's coming up, who's going to have a child of 1,260 days. And then the last one is the woman when she flees to the desert, that she is nourished for a time, times, and half time. So if you take time, that's 1 year. Times, that's 2 years, so 3 years. And half time, that's 3.5 years. So there is a description of events that happen in the next chapters that deals with this time. And it's, why is that used 3 different ways? It may be just kind of stylistic. It may be just a apocalyptic language. We don't understand that. We don't have that much apocalyptic language in that, which is basically events that will happen told with stories of wild things, individuals that represent a huge majority of people, or a huge majority of this, but it's depicted as an individual. But in the time that this was written in John's Revelation, that was a very accepted and very liked way of communicating. And it was also a way to hide details from somebody that you didn't want to know what you were saying. In other words, so you didn't get in trouble if you were saying something bad about a leader or something like that. So it was a way to hide the language. But it's interesting. So we're going to discover what this 42 months, 1260 days, times and half time, what that is, when is that time frame. And in chapter 11, verse 1, then there was given to me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, "Get up and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship in it. Leave out the courtyard, which is outside of the temple, and do not measure it, because it has been given to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So here's our first 42 months, 3.5 years. So let's just look at that. What is this 42 months? If you go to Luke 21, verse 6, Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. And he says, as for these things which you are observing, the days will come when there will not be one stone left upon another, which is not torn down. And he's talking about the temple. You can see that from the verse 5. And while some are talking about the temple, that it is decorated with beautiful stones and vowed gifts, he said, as for these things which you are observing, the days will come when not one stone will not be left upon the another, which is not torn down. So he's talking about the destruction of the temple, and so the disciples are like, well, hey, when is this going to happen? When is this going to take place? And what's the signs that we would know that this is going to take place? And he then describes that in verse 20. He says, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are inside the city must leave. Talking about the 144,000, the remnant. And those who are in the country must not enter the city. Why? Because it's going to be surrounded by armies. Because these are the days of punishment, so that all things which have been written will be fulfilled. Woe to the woman who is pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land. The land. Generally, the land is Israel. And wrath to this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive to all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. So this is Jesus' own words of the destruction of Jerusalem, and particularly the temple, and the time of the Gentiles. So I'm going to say that what is the time of the Gentiles? Time of the Gentiles is this. So the time of the Gentiles is complete. John is told to leave out the courtyard, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, because it has been given to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So if you put those two together, then the time of the Gentiles is this 42 months or 3.5 years. So it can't possibly be a literal 42 months or a literal 1260 days or a little time times and half times, but it is a depiction of a time that the time of the Gentiles is in process. So what does that mean? So the temple was destroyed, the 144 left before any of that happened, which is just a symbol of the remnant that God saved. He always seemed to save a remnant who that believed God and didn't just fall into doing whatever they wanted to do, basically. But that the city would be trampled for 42 months. The time of the Gentiles is this 42 months. That 42 months started at 70 AD when the temple was destroyed, and has continued and will continue, as we'll see, until the time of the Gentiles, or basically the seventh trumpet. And when Christ returns and the time of the Gentiles is complete, then that's when Christ returns. In other words, when as many of the Gentiles and Jews, but it's one body now, when that number comes and that's it, that's all that there is that's going to be saved, then Jesus will come back, because the time of the Gentiles is over, and then we go into all the other things. That's all. I'm out of time because I try and keep these at 30 minutes. We will take up in the next one talking about the two witnesses, who they are. We will talk about the beast. We'll talk about the woman, and then we will get to the seventh trumpet. So if you have questions, you've never heard this kind of explanation before, and you have questions or whatever, you can message me at 77thedad77@gmail.com, and we can have an offline discussion. Like it, share it, be it, know it. Have a good day.